Good evening, wrestling fans. You are with the Two Bros Wrestling Show. Thank you so much for joining us. Um, the Two Bros Wrestling Show is obviously one bro this week, and so I appreciate you sticking with me. Doug, who is normally here, unfortunately was released this week by WWE. Probably too soon to joke about that, but obviously Doug would be here if he could because we are discussing something that is of great importance to him. Dynamite Doug wishes he could be here to talk about Full Gear, AEW and Full Gear coming up. The last pay per view of AEW's calendar year hits this upcoming Saturday, and I'm excited about it. Doug's excited about it. Hopefully, you're excited about it. We are going to go through the card and talk about how we got to the matches that we got to, which ones we're excited about, and we're going to talk about winners and losers as well, who we think is going to walk away with the titles and the victories. But before we get into that being our main event topic, we of course, as always, are going to start with the opening bell. And there is so much news this week to go through. And I never would have imagined that the John Moxley story was not going to end up being the top story this week. But we have to start, of course, with the mass layoffs that happened in World Wrestling Entertainment this past week. I should say the most recent round of mass layoffs. Though layoffs in corporate WWE have sort of been an annual thing for years, it's definitely got a lot more frequent over the last year and a half. And this latest round has claimed 18 men and women who some of whom were kind of surprising, some maybe not so much. So before we get into the remainder of our news items, I wanted to go through this list as well as when mentioning these folks, where I think that they possibly could end up, because it's worth pointing out that AEW is not going to be the landing spot for every last available talent that hits the market these days. There just simply isn't enough room at AEW to accommodate this large quantity of free agents that are currently on the market between these layoffs and the recent announcement that Ring of Honor is going to be closing its doors for a little while and releasing all of its talent. So I will say before we get into the list of names that supposedly the word going around WWE, the internal messaging on these layoffs is that they were budget cuts. And I would point out to that, just for some context, that this occurred on Thursday, which is a day after the WWE announced their third quarter financials. And in their third quarter this year, they made $255.8 million, which was a 15% increase over quarter three earnings a year ago. So they're citing budget cuts, and it truly may be to cut the budget, but it wasn't because there was a need to cut the budget. They've done very well financially. The truth is that right now the rosters on most wrestling companies is bloated beyond what there is room on TV to feature everyone. So yes, they can save some money and make those bottom lines look even better by getting rid of folks who, for the most part, as you'll see, not being used or not being used correctly. So let's start. I want to work through this list with some of the biggest names, maybe some of the more shocking names coming up first. And first on that list for me, Keith Lee. Um, to me, Keith Lee is the biggest missed opportunity here. We're talking a former NXT star who one time stood in a Royal Rumble ring right across from Brock Lesnar with the crowd going nuts for Keith Lee getting an opportunity to face what at the time was the hottest star in WWE. So he came on like a bolt of lightning when they moved him up to the main roster. It looked like the sky was going to be the limit for him, and his push stalled very quickly. Went from main eventing right off the bat to honestly disappearing. He did have a health issue, a COVID issue that kept him off screen for a long time, but his push had already stalled before that. But it certainly never regained momentum once he came back. They recently tried to repackage him as Bearcat Keith Lee, which was a nickname that, while having some historical context to it, was something that Keith himself had not suggested it was put upon him. He, as always, tried to make the most of things, but it didn't go well. And Keith Lee is the most surprising name to me on this list, even though in some ways I guess you could say it's not surprising because they never have seemed to know what to do with Keith Lee. But even though I started this out by saying that not everyone that was released is going to have an opportunity at AEW, I think that Keith Lee on this list of 18 individuals is the one with the greatest opportunity for AEW because I believe that Tony Khan will see the value in adding Keith Lee to the roster. Before I move on to the next name, though, I will say that there were reports that were coming out of WWE, internal reports, that what you had was a situation where maybe Keith was not so open to directions backstage, that he was difficult. And again, I'm just reporting that this is what some folks inside were saying, that he didn't want to do jobs, didn't want to lose to certain people, and everyone's protective of their characters. I had always heard previously that Keith Lee was one of the genuine good guys, and Doug and I had an opportunity to meet him, and he was certainly kind to us. And so who knows if there were reports, if there's anything behind these reports, or people are just trying to cover their tracks after what happened to Keith Lee. But I didn't want to let it pass that that wasn't part of the narrative, and that supposedly he was hard to direct. But I do think he will land at AEW, and I do think he'll be a huge star in AEW. So we'll see. Next, and the big names, and then the big opportunities that were missed, we'll go to Karrion Kross. Reportedly, Karrion was going to be repackaged soon anyway. He hadn't been on the main roster all that long, but his main roster push was doomed from the start by being booked to lose in his very first match on Raw. And then, he appeared when he moved up. He was moved up without Scarlet, his real life fiance, and someone who is a big part of that act. And so between that and the stupid costume that they ended up putting him in, I mean, it was just a series of errors that continued once he made it out of NXT to the main roster, and it never worked. So while his biggest success, before he got to WWE's ecosystem and went to NXT, he had success in NXT, but his greatest success by far was Impact up to this point. But one of the reasons he left anyway and signed with WWE to begin with is that Impact had lowballed him on an offer for a contract. They didn't see the value in him. So that bridge is probably burned, and I don't see him necessarily going back to Impact. But other than Keith Lee, I believe that Kross and the next person on my list that I'm going to mention in a second are the ones most likely to find space on what is a bloated AEW roster. I believe that Tony Khan finds room for Keith Lee. I think he finds room for Karrion Kross, and then moving on to the next name on the list, he finds room for Scarlet Bardo. Scarlet's the real life fiance of Kross. She wrestles as well, but you wouldn't know this if you only know her from WWE because apparently she was good enough for WWE's dark matches, but they never put her on camera or in the ring for whatever reason. And then they took her off camera, period, before Karrion got moved up to the main roster. Again, really curious as to why they made those decisions, but I believe that they are a package deal. This isn't a Miro Lana situation where I think that, Miro obviously is doing fine on his own. I think that Karrion Kross would do fine on his own. I think he would do much better if Scarlett is part of that presentation, because she is a big part of that presentation. And honestly, I think it's a big reason why the act felt a little flat when he got up to Raw. So the first three names on that list, I believe, are going to AEW when the time is right and their no compete goes away. This next name is probably, to me, the most surprising. Whereas Karrion and Keith were misused, even though they were probably some of the most talented folks you could find, this next person is someone who hasn't had a chance to be misused. BFAB, she supposedly just signed a new contract just last week with WWE. And as you know, she's only been on SmackDown for like 2.5, 3 weeks, whenever the draft was here just a few weeks back. One of the hottest acts in all of wrestling, the hottest act in NXT. They move up to the main roster as part of the draft, and now Hit Row is no longer a four-piece, they're a three-piece. And I will say, SmackDown this past week being the first opportunity to see them as a three-piece, it was noticeable that there was a difference, and that the fourth person there, being BFAB, was definitely missed in that equation. She's the only female member of the group. She provided balance. There was, there's a specific reason for everyone in that group and why it works as a collective, and it just seems now like something's missing. So I don't know why you'd move them onto the main roster and then give up on her that fast. She was fantastic on the mic. She hasn't had a lot of opportunities in the ring, but looked like there was a lot of potential there as well. It's worrisome to me for the rest of Hit Row that they're already cannibalizing this act, which should be a can't miss gimmick. But so to me, where does she go? She doesn't really have a reputation on her own or a record on her own, and I don't know that she's far advanced enough to rest on her own laurels on the wrestling side of it. So to me, her ultimate fate is really going to depend on what happens in the future to the rest of Hit Row. Maybe if things don't work out for the rest of them, and over time they form back up in another organization. But for right now, I'd say it's probably the indie scene or someplace else to really learn her trade is what she was really doing on the big time, on the big stage in WWE. But now it's probably back to the indies for her. Nia Jax, which was a bit of a surprising name. And I will point out that Nia was, as part of her release, it was reported that one of the reasons that she was being let go is because of her vaccination status. And she was quick to point out that it wasn't the truth, or at the very least, she was never informed that it had anything to do with WWE's decision. She said she was on a mental break. As you know, you've not seen her on TV in quite some time. She was taken off air a while ago with a storyline injury, but she said she was needing a mental reset and had recently asked to have that extended. And the next thing you know, she said she heard she was let go. The reports were, though, that her vaccination status did play into it. In fact, apparently, the four folks on this list were supposedly released as a result of refusing to get vaccinated. But the only one that was mentioned by name was Nia Jax. Don't know if any of that had to do with why she was released. But she is a former women's champion. She's been a big star for a lot of years now in the women's division at WWE. But she also had a reputation for being careless and dangerous in the ring. So she's also getting close to 40, and considering that she's not in her 20s or early 30s, there's only so many wrestling years any man or woman's body is going to have. And especially if you have a reputation that maybe you're a little careless, I have a feeling that this might be the end of Nia Jax's wrestling career, and she might be moving on to other things. Or she could possibly, wrestle the occasional indie match. But I do believe that, at least for the time being, Nia Jax may be out of the world of wrestling. Brings us to our next performer that was let go this week. Frankie Monet, another one that's a bit surprising in just the fact that she was barely around long enough to make much of an impression. Despite wrestling for years on the Indies and in Mexico, and then, of course, great success and Impact. But the real life wife of Johnny Drip Drip, John Morrison, just was signed to WWE last year. And actually earlier this year, so she didn't even make it a full calendar year with WWE, and she was let go. So I think the best thing that could be said about this is that she can get away from the stupid Frankie Monet name and go back to the much better Taya Valkyrie name that she'd used for years building her career. And she didn't burn any bridges at Impact, and she was a long-time Impact Women's Champion there. So I think that that's where she heads back to, and I think that's the best opportunity for her to continue making a name for herself in the world of wrestling. Next up, Ember Moon. Ember should have been a big WWE star, but after a very long absence due to injury, in fact, the injury so severe that they thought that she may never have an opportunity to wrestle again, she never really regained her footing once she came back from the injury. When she came back from the injury, they put her from the main brand and instead took her over to NXT, which I think was probably a good move for her to rebuild herself. But it never really happened, and especially once they decided that they were going to restructure NXT to focus more on extremely young talent, the writing was sort of on the wall for Ember at that point. And I think that as far as female talent goes, she's the one on this list that Tony Khan may make room for at an AEW. I think the ceiling for her is still higher than what she's managed to reach up to this point, which is maybe not the case for some of the talent on this list of folks that were released, who probably are already past their primes. I think that she still has some prime years ahead of her, and I think that she would enhance that division. So if any female from this list of released wrestlers ends up in AEW, count on it being Ember Moon. Maya Kim was also let go, and this one is probably, you could say, related to the fact that her real life fiance is Keith Lee. And so the two probably were being thought of as a package, in that it was easy to, if you're going to let one go, to let the other go. Whereas Keith had, untapped potential, Maya's untapped potential, or I should just say unrealized potential, in that she was saddled with a horrible gimmick when Retribution was honestly the only run she really had was with Retribution. She was good at NXT, and once they put her on their main roster, that the Retribution angle went nowhere, and as a result, she went nowhere, and so she's not even been on WWE TV since March, and now she's gone. So I think she may follow where Keith does. Obviously, a real life couple is going to be better working for the same company, and that they get to travel together. And I know I said that Keith's probably going to AEW. I think that she could possibly find room on that AEW roster, but probably more on the YouTube side of Dark or Dark Elevation. There's just simply not enough spots at AEW anymore. So I see her maybe moving on to an Impact. I could see her maybe going to Impact with their strong women's division. She has a history there, and she didn't burn any bridges either. So I think that Impact has a light enough schedule that it wouldn't keep her away from Keith. And I just don't think that AEW has enough room to absorb everybody. So I think Mia goes to Impact if she continues her wrestling career. Trey Baxter, now going by Blake Christian. He was already has some indie bookings. Apparently, his no compete was one of the 30 days. Some of these folks are have no competes for 90. Baxter's only got 30. He's wrestling in a GCW show in December. Blink, you would have missed him on the new NXT 2.0. So I think that what he's doing now with GCW is probably where he lands at this point, and that is, pardon me, and that is going back to the indie scene. And um, best of luck to Trey Baxter out there on the indie scene. Next up, Oni Lorcan. Lorcan is a solid competitor, maybe solid slash unspectacular, and I hate to say that because he's had a 6 7 year run at NXT, and it was very a very solid, decent career. Had some championships there as part of a tag team, but he never really stood out. Uh, Especially on the single side of things, he's a bit on the older side at this point, for an NXT, especially that is focusing on younger folks. They're looking at 20 somethings, and that's not Lorcan any longer. He'd be a perfect addition to a place like Ring of Honor, just someone who was wrestling a very solid mat based style without a lot of flash or things like that. He would have done well in the honor tournaments and the like. But obviously, Ring of Honor is getting ready to go on hiatus, which means there's just one less place for all this released talent to work. So where does Anoni Lorcan go? I think honestly that of what's remaining out there as far as options go, I can see him, going to the NWA. I can see, Billy Corgan giving him a call, and I think he would fit in well with what they have going on there. I think that might be his best option. Moving on, Jessie Kamea. Great look, but never had time to shine in the ring at NXT. She was mostly part of a group and was oftentimes the one on the outside of the ring. So, if a WOW Women of Wrestling comes calling, I think that could be a good move. Otherwise, my guess is Kamea leaves the ring and moves on with the next phase of her life. Again, she's sort of a late bloomer, so it's not like she's been paying dues for years or young enough, early enough in her career that she's going to go elsewhere and learn. I think that's quite possible that this is the end of the line for her. We'll see. Zeta Ramir. Ramir is, never made it out of developmental, and so you probably don't know that name. I didn't really know that name. Because she never made it out of developmental, she doesn't have a name that she can really hang a shingle on as far as going out there and promoting herself in the indie world. She does have some history with Shimmer, and so if she were to continue in the wrestling field, I'd say that a return back to Shimmer to try to rebuild herself and her reputation, and then move her way back up through the ranks, probably likely. Grand Metalik. Now, this is one that wasn't at all a surprise. Metalik and Lince Dorado. We might as well put those two together because their circumstances are very similar. Not only were they a tag team, they are also two that had very publicly wanted their release from WWE and were not granted the release when they were first asking for it months ago. Well, they both got it now. So Grand Metalik and Lince Dorado are back to being free agents the way that they want. They were never really utilized to the most of their potential. They were just jobbing out all the time. Two talented high flyers. They will find much greener pastures back in a lucha libre environment. So I see them going down to AAA or the Crash or someplace in Mexico or maybe even Japan and rebuilding what they've lost all these years in the WWE ecosystem. Jeet Rama. Now, Rama wasn't on our screens very often, and so you might not be all that familiar with him either, but it seemed for a while like he was going to have a big future in WWE, if only for the fact that for a while WWE was rumored to be planning these NXT outposts around the world to have these regional promotions in other parts of the world, like they have done in NXT UK. They were supposed to be doing that for a Japanese promotion as well as an Indian promotion to take advantage of one of the largest potential fan bases that was still untapped there in India. And Rama was going to be a centerpiece of that, but with the pandemic and financial issues regarding the pandemic, the expansion never happened. It's not for sure whether or not the expansion will still happen at any point. So Rama's career stalled as a result of the pandemic, and probably means he will move beyond wrestling after his release, unless he finds indie work there in India. Katrina Cortez. This is another that if you say who, you're not alone. She was WWE's only masked female wrestler and was not on screen very often, but she did sign at the age of 19 and only was on shows like 205 Live. So if you blinked, you would have missed her. She's still very young in the business, obviously. So Mexico or Japan would probably be more open to her style of wrestling. And at her age, she has time to continue her career and maybe make her way back to either WWE or an AEW or some larger platform at some point. Harry Smith. And if you asked that, or if you say that you didn't even know that the son of the British Bulldog was actually a WWE employee, you of course you wouldn't, because he's never been featured on WWE programming. So I was surprised as well when I saw his name amongst the releases, and I'd found out that, like, oh yeah, I remember that news item a long time ago of him being picked up. But then when you never saw him, you just kind of forgot about it. Harry's not a young. He's obviously young enough for the world of professional wrestling, but he's not like a teenager or anything. He's wrestled around the world, has had great success in Japan and elsewhere. But apparently the WWE is not a place for him because this wasn't his first go around with WWE. When he was a younger man, he signed to WWE early on, and that didn't pan out. And then this second time around didn't pan out for him either. So I see Harry going back to the British Bulldog name and um, honoring his father, maybe going back to MLW. He was a lot of had a lot of success there prior to signing with WWE, and never made it all the way to the top of that promotion. Right now, the champion over there is Alexander Hammerstone, and I mean, if you can picture, I certainly can, Hammerstone versus Harry Smith, and that's a match I'd like to see. I think a lot of people would like to see. So um, here's hoping that that's maybe Harry's next move. And then finally, we'll end. I know it's a long list, but it was a lot of layoffs. So we're going to end with um, Eva Marie. And don't want to speak ill of anyone, but honestly, it was more shocking that she got rehired this past year than it was shocking to learn that it didn't quite work out. Nothing against Eva, but her return was, it came after a very long absence, which, was predated by a run that was more remarkable for her time on like Total Divas than her time in the ring. And notoriously, she was not a quick learner in the ring, and apparently she didn't really learn much while she was away either, because when she returned this year she didn't really show a whole lot of improvement. But don't feel sorry for Eva. She's got a lot going on in the world of acting and fashion design and modeling, and so she has other opportunities. And I think this may be the end of the road of her wrestling, as far as her wrestling career goes. So best of luck to her. Best of luck to all these men and women. That is a lot of folks now on the unemployment lines, at least for 30 to maybe 90 days, depending on what their no compete clauses have them with. So we do wish them all well. And before we get to the main event topic, we do have a few other news items I'd like to go through, because the talent releases of this past week were not the only releases in WWE. There was some on the office side too, and this what is yet another major shakeup in WWE. First off, Senior VP of Creative Services Stan Stansky has left the company. He was brought in as a Vice President of Creative Services all the way back in 2006, was promoted to Senior Vice President in 2012. He'd been there for 15 years then, so his release was reportedly a shock to a lot of folks behind the scenes, and in fact, it was said it was the ultimate proof that no one is safe, and that this place was not the place it was even a year ago, as far as this company being the same. And that says a lot right there. Another corporate office shakeup is that the previous chief financial officer, Christina Salen, is also out as part of the shakeup, and they have a new chief financial officer, Frank Riddick. So it was very quick to replace Christina Salen. And again, the front office being shook up at the same time the talent roster is being shaken up. It's left a lot of people that are currently still employed with the company nervous that anyone can go at any time and that other shoe could drop at any time. Um, Scary times in WWE. Sort of tying into all that is this next news item, and that is that WWE is reportedly making or at least considering a pretty big change to its signing process, and as far as giving guys developmental contracts. So it's always been you sign with developmental, you work your way up, and hopefully you make it to the main rosters and fame and fortune, right? Well, supposedly WWE now is looking at developmental as a opportunity and a privilege just to be looked at, and that instead of signing folks to contracts, they're looking at signing them to a trial period. And this is according to the Wrestling Observer newsletter, that it will be the new norm that you get a 60-day trial, and if you show any promise in your 60-day trial, then you get the developmental contract. So I'm sure there'll be possible exceptions to this rule. If you are a can't miss prospect, or a super athlete coming out of college with a name, and they were making a big deal about your signing, you probably go straight to developmental and skip that trial period. But I guess to protect themselves from having so many contracts, that they then ended up having to have these sort of mass releases that we just had in our first news item talked about, that this is one way to maybe prevent that, is that you get a trial period, and if you show any promise and stick, they give you the contract. Um, then to the story that I actually thought, when I started putting my notes together, was going to be the top story this week, and that is Jon Moxley, the former AEW champion that came out this week, has voluntarily entered an inpatient alcohol treatment program. And this news was reported by Tony Khan. It was tweeted out by AEW and Tony, and with Moxley's permission. But obviously, the promotion is using this as an example of how they support their talent, and it is, obviously a lot to do when you go forward admitting you have a problem, and for Moxley to come out and admit that he needed help speaks well of his chances for success. And we definitely wish him those chances of success, because not only does he have a beautiful and talented wife in Renee, they just had their first child together this past year, so he has a lot beyond just wrestling to live for and to be healthy for. So Jon Moxley, we hope, wish you all the best in your alcohol treatment rehab, and hopefully we'll see you when you're ready. And because, though, of this sudden change, AEW had to kind of do, remaneuver things on the fly. We have Full Gear that we're going to talk about here in our main event topic. We have Full Gear coming up this Saturday, and Moxley was going to be a big part of that, in that he was a part of the World Title Elimination Tournament. This past week on Dynamite, he should have been taking on Orange Cassidy in the semifinal match, and it was presumed that Moxley was going to win that match and then go into the finals to face Bryan Danielson at the pay-per-view. Obviously, that didn't happen, and AEW had to pivot and go to Miro last minute on the show this past Wednesday, and Miro advanced, and so Miro will now be going on and facing Bryan Danielson at the pay-per-view. NXT 2.0 may be getting its first streaming special. So reports came out this week that there's tentatively an event scheduled for Sunday, December 5th. WWE doesn't have a main roster pay-per-view for the month of December right now, so all of that attention could be put on an NXT 2.0 special. Obviously, we don't know that it's going to be called Takeover, because maybe the Takeover name is too associated with the former NXT, and they might want to rebrand the pay-per-views the same way they rebranded the promotion, but it would still be obviously the same concept if it happens. If it does happen, it's something that they better announce soon, because there's not a lot of TV between now and then for them to build to any sort of meaningful feuds or programs. Impact Wrestling, in our next news item, they've also had, we won't call them layoffs, but there's 5 names that have disappeared from their roster page. And so that includes Tommy Dreamer, the former No Way Jose, Taylor Wilde, TJP, and Petey Williams. And so while we can't say that these individuals were all released from their contracts, there's definitely some, hints that some of these folks may be moving on. Their contracts may have ended, or there may be other reasons why their names were taken off the roster. Petey Williams, for example, has been trying out in a producer role for WWE, and has been working some of the last few TV tapings for WWE backstage, sort of on a trial basis. So it makes sense why a PD would have been taken off the Impact roster. TJP, on the other hand, has been wrestling a little bit in places like MLW, so maybe he's moved on as well. But these folks may be more free agents out there in the world of professional wrestling. Good news for the fans of the Stars drama Heels, which was announced this week that it would be returning for a second season. The first season was very critically well received. The ratings were started out strong, tapered off as it went along, kind of middling ratings overall, so it wasn't a guarantee that it was going to get a second season pickup, but actually I just started binge watching it. Binge watched the whole thing over this past weekend. Had not seen the first season, and I could not have loved it more. Would be curious what those of you at home, if you've seen it, thought of it. But good news for fans of that program that we will get a season two. I can hardly wait. In the other news, it's being reported that NXT star Zoe Starks is going to be out for a bit, having to undergo surgery on her knee. She suffered an injury during the three-way tag team ladder match on the Halloween Havoc edition of NXT, so get well soon to Zoe. And that is the opening bell and the news for the week that was this past week, a very eventful week. And so we're going to move on now to our main event topic, and that is a preview of AEW's Full Gear. And Full Gear is going to be the last pay-per-view for AEW this year, and it follows on the heels of their most successful ever pay-per-view in Double or Nothing. And it's hard to think that this card, as good as it is as good as what Double or Nothing is or was. But I think AEW has a lot of momentum now, so there's a very good chance that this could be another very successful pay-per-view that comes very close to the numbers that Double or Nothing put up. But let's look now, match by match, at how we got to these matches and who I think is going to win them. And then we'll come back next week, and anybody wants to challenge me and make fun of how wrong I got it, you're welcome to, since Doug's not here to do so himself. But he's usually the one that's wrong. If you watch the two of us predict, I'm right 90% of the time, and Doug is right occasionally, like a clock, at least twice a day, right? A broken clock that Doug is. We'll go CM Punk first, and CM Punk versus Eddie Kingston, very likely to be the opening contest on Full Gear to get the crowd off hot, because the crowd is still very hot for CM Punk. Eddie Kingston, he could suffer a billion losses and it would not lose a thing, because as soon as you put a microphone in the man's hand, you want to invest in whatever storyline it is that he has going on at the time. And this has been something that they've been building to over the last few weeks of television. And while Eddie is a great foil for CM Punk at this stage of Punk's AEW run, he is not really a threat to CM Punk. There's no reason to believe that a CM Punk who is on his way to main event status in AEW at some point in the world title scene, there's no reason to believe that he's going to do anything but win for a while. So CM Punk definitely is the favored opponent in this one to go over for that win. Next on the card, we have the Minneapolis Street Fight match, which is a reunited inner circle against the team of Men of the Year, Junior Dos Santos, Andre Arlovsky, and Dan Lambert. So basically, you got America's top team plus Men of the Year taking on a reunited inner circle. Dan Lambert, I don't think, gets enough credit for just what a great heel he is. He seems so natural on the mic and so genuinely despicable. And even though his background is completely based in the world of mixed martial arts, he has been a long time professional wrestling fan. And this run he's had with AEW is not the first time that he's entered the world of professional wrestling. He's had a cup of coffee in the past with MLW, and truly is a admirer of the business. He has a well known to have a large title collection of old wrestling championships that he has and displays. And so, he's definitely probably living a bit of a fantasy camp for him by being able to be part of this industry that he's long admired. And I think he's doing a fantastic job getting that heel heat. Obviously, Men of the Year are going to have to do a lot of the heavy lifting in this for their side, because when you're talking Junior Dos Santos, Andrea Arlovsky, and especially Dan himself, you're talking about non-wrestlers. So while they may have some physicality, and it has to be limited in a way that doesn't make everybody look bad. And Inner Circle, obviously you got Chris Jericho, and he's got to go over here. That I don't see any way that the non wrestlers win in this situation, especially when you want to get the juice back behind a reunited Inner Circle. So Inner Circle all the way on this one, in what could be a surprisingly entertaining match, considering that you're probably not expecting a lot from the America's Top Team folks. Then you have Falls Count Anywhere. Let's look at the Falls Count Anywhere match where you have Jurassic Express and Christian Cage taking on the Super Click, and that's the Young Bucks and Adam Cole. Young Bucks and Adam Cole, the Super Click, they you got to give them the nod on this one. I love Jungle Boy. I think he's got a bright future. I have nothing against Cage, nothing but respect actually for Cage and Luchasaurus as well. But I don't think Jungle Boy. I think it's just safe to say that Jungle Boy is not the one that's going to take the pin here. But the Super Click is just too new of a item with Adam Cole's recent arrival to be doing in jobs at this point. So I don't see Jurassic Express and Christian Cage pulling this one off. So I think that Luchasaurus, or more likely Christian Cage, takes the pinfall on this one. Darby Allen versus MJF, and this is the way we got to this one is MJF kind of built this one completely on his own. Man's one of the best talkers in the business, and then when it went on the mic, mentioned that, and this wasn't even directed at Darby Allen at the time. This was directed to elsewhere. But during this promo, MJF mentioned that the four pillars of AEW included, and he went down the list, and of course mentioned himself, but also mentioned Darby Allen. And this is a way of getting Darby Allen, putting over Darby Allen. And then, of course, that means you leading to this challenge of where you have MJF challenging Darby Allen. And MJF is not one to lose very often. He lost, of course, when he was pursuing the world championship, and then had a bit of a back and forth with Chris Jericho there afterwards. But for the most part, MJF is going to win more often than lose. This might be one of those occasions, though, where he loses, and I'm much higher on the ceiling for MJF than I am Darby Allen. If Doug were here, we'd probably argue about Darby Allen a little bit. I'll be honest, I never quite got Darby. For the longest time, I just didn't see what others saw in him. And while he's still not my favorite AEW athlete, I have come to appreciate him a lot more over the last 4 or 5 months than I did originally. But still, I don't think there's any way in the world he should be going over MJF. But I believe because the company thinks so high of him, and he recently lost his, TNT championship, and then ever since then he's not really regained footing. I think he needs the win more, and I think AEW will see that he needs the win more as the face that they want to build around, one of the faces that they want to build around. And MJF won't lose anything by taking the pinfall loss, but this will be a big victory for Darby Allen if it goes the way that I'm predicting that it's going to go. Coming up next, we have the championship matches that are going to end probably the pay-per-view on Saturday. Let's start first with the tag team title match. You got the AEW World Tag Team Championships when you have the champion Lucha Brothers defending against FTR. FTR, of course, is a tag team that has held those belts in the past. FTR also recently defeated the Lucha Brothers to take the AAA Tag Team Championships away from them. And so they, were multiple belt holders at the time, and FTR has taken away the AAA titles and now threatened to take away the AEW championships as well. I think that to continue this feud a little bit longer, I believe that this time around the Lucha Brothers get that victory back, so that they go 1-1 really, and that you still are going to have a situation where the AAA championships are going to be around the waist of FTR, while the AEW championships remain around the waist of Lucha Brothers. And this would set up a winner-take-all third and deciding contest, which I think might be where we end up going with this one. So I'm going to predict that because of that, Lucha Brothers retain on this stage. I said this is when we get to the all the championships, right? There is one other match that isn't a championship title contest, but it does have championship. Definitely has championship implications, and that is we'll see the finals of the world title, the Eliminator tournament, as they're calling it, and that means that the person that comes out at the top of this tournament is going to be the number one contender. And as we mentioned in our news segment, a lot of folks probably thought it was going to be Jon Moxley versus Bryan Danielson. It did appear that that's the way that they were heading, because they had to make that change with Jon Moxley dropping out of the professional wrestling picture for a little while. Now we're going to see Bryan Danielson versus Miro. Now, obviously, you could try to swerve the audience by going with the guy who wasn't supposed to be there to begin with. And that's not an uncommon thing in the world of professional wrestling for promoters to do. But in this instance, I don't think that they will. I don't think that there's any reason to think that Bryan Danielson, still want to call him Daniel Bryan, but there's no reason to think that Bryan Danielson isn't going to continue his hot start to his AEW career, his undefeated streak, until he finds himself in a world championship match. Quickest way to that world championship match is winning this tournament, which I think he probably would have done even if he was facing Jon Moxley. I really think it's what's going to happen now that he's facing Miro. So definitely expect Bryan Danielson to pick up the victory and become the number one contender as a result. The World's Women's Championship, the AEW Women's Champion Britt Baker, DMD, takes on Ty Conte, and Ty is one of probably the to date biggest challengers that Britt's had. Ty is one who has really been built up over the last 5-6 months, probably one of the more popular female up and comers in the world of AEW, and despite that, I don't think the Good Doctor has held that title long enough yet to lose it. And I don't think that Ty is necessarily the one at this point to take it from her. And so I'm going to say that the Good Doctor retains in this one. I don't expect it to be clean. I expect that the Rebel or some outside shenanigans probably end up being the cause of the retention. But one way or the other, Britt Baker is still going to be your AEW Women's Champion after Saturday night. Which brings us to our main event and the final match of the night. And that is one that's probably been the longest brewing match that AEW has in their pocket. And they've held off on this for quite some time now. And in some ways, the moment they let Kenny Omega, the AEW World Champion, come out of that tag team that he had with Hangman Page more than a year ago to start this amazing singles run he's been on, it's all been leading back to that moment that he and Hangman would hook back up. The tag team, of course, disintegrated and they had their feud, but after that point in time, they've been kept separate, and Kenny's just blasted off as the belt collector, winning world titles, not just in AEW, but every promotion he went to. All of this was to reestablish Kenny Omega as the man that we all knew from New Japan Wrestling, right? And still, Hangman's been back there in the background waiting his time, and that time is now. And I honestly, the only thing that complicates this one for me, I was going to easily predict that this is the time that Hangman completes that hero's journey and is the one that finally wrestles away the world title from Kenny Omega after a very long run that he's had with the belt after beating Jon Moxley. I still think that will happen. I think that if we see a title change on Saturday night, it's going to be Hangman taking that belt away from Kenny. However, the only thing that gives me pause is we know that earlier in this pay-per-view, the number one contender is going to be named, and that number one contender is more than likely going to be Bryan Danielson. Bryan Danielson had that amazing match that ended up in pretty much a no contest, a draw with Kenny Omega on AEW TV. And because of the jeopardy Kenny found himself in and being the good heel that Kenny Omega is, he's pretty much said, never again, you're never getting another shot at this belt. Because of that and because of how good that match was, that we just knew at some point there would actually be that rematch. That is the only thing that's making me hedge my bets on Hangman walking away with the title, it may have been in the cards that Hangman was going to walk away with the title all along, and now they may be trying to decide on what the finish of this world title match should be, knowing that there would be a lot of potential and interest in a Bryan Danielson Kenny Omega rematch for that championship. So I'm still going to go Hangman Page, and that may now not be as popular a decision as it probably would have been. It's certainly not a universal decision, I'm sure. A lot of folks think that Kenny Omega is going to retain. I believe that there's still a way to get to the rematch. I think that Hangman Page could walk away with a title, and then Kenny have a feud with Bryan Danielson outside of a world title environment, with Bryan Danielson still having that world championship match in his pocket to go somewhere down the line. So I think that this is when we finally see an AEW title switch. And kudos to AEW. They have been very responsible about keeping their champions strong and having long title reigns. When you look at a Britt Baker, she hasn't had it. She's had a pretty long run by WWE standards. It's a short run in AEW standards because the lady she took the world title from, Sheeta, held the belt for an extremely long time. And now you have Kenny Omega having a really long title run. So I do think all good things come to an end. It happens here, but even if it doesn't, we still are going to be the ultimate winners because the match should be great, and there's a chance that that means that we then get to see Bryan Danielson versus Kenny Omega for our champion. So whichever way they go with this one, we all are going to end up winners. And that is Full Gear 2021. Well, who do you think is going to win? You look forward to the show. What match are you most looking forward to? And is there any matches that I predicted that you think I got horribly, horribly wrong? Let us know in the comments, and we go through the comments after every show. If we don't see them as you're making them live, we go through the ones on YouTube and Facebook, and we try to respond to everybody. So we definitely want to know what you guys are thinking. And with that, we're going to go to our big finish. The big finish of the week. Let's start with the botch of the week. Christian returned to AEW TV this week, and he did so after the absence he had was because he was the Impact World Champion and had been spending his time on Impact Wrestling. And he returned, and the only real acknowledgement of that return on commentary was Excalibur exclaiming, "Christian's back." That's it. End of story. Well, duh, Christian's back. We're seeing him here on the screen. No mention of the fact he had been in Impact. No mention of the fact that he recently dropped the Impact World title and to Josh Alexander, who then quickly dropped it himself to Moose. But all of that just is indicative of how this relationship, this open door policy between AEW and Impact was really heavily tilted and one-sided towards AEW. And, the fact that Christian returns to AEW TV with not even so much as a mention of the fact that, oh yeah, he'd been gone being world champion, across town at the other promotion. Like nothing, just Christian's back. So just a botched opportunity. Overall, the open door policy that they had, the forbidden door swinging open, has been really good for wrestling, really good for AEW programming. Should have been better for Impact than I think what it worked out to be, and this was just more problematic evidence of that. And considering the relationship for now anyways is apparently over, I guess in some ways it's a fitting way that it ends more with a whimper than a bang, at least as far as Impact goes. That's my botch of the week. Performance of the week. I'm going to probably pinch myself as I say it, but Michael Cole, I don't know that I've ever said Michael Cole at all did anything overly positive. I'm fine on Cole. I don't hate on him the way that some do. Certainly not a coal miner, as he likes to call his fans. But I will give credit where it's due. Michael Cole this week got a one-liner in that just totally cracked me up. But when questioning Sonya Deville's performance on SmackDown this past week. Of course, she is an on-air authority figure. He was questioning her motives. He was questioning the responsibility of her authority. He exclaims, "Where's Jack Tunney?" And if you're an old school wrestling fan than just the bringing up the name Jack Tunney, who was an on-air authority figure in the 1980s for WWF at the time. It just had to crack you up. Jack Tunney was the figurehead, the GM at the time, or commissioner, I think is what his actual name was. His actual title at the time was that of commissioner. Um, Kudos to Cole for bringing that little piece of WWE history back to those of us who remember it. WWE is not necessarily always the greatest at acknowledging their past history, so that little nod I thought was pretty clever and well done by Michael Cole. And then finally, match of the week. If there is a match that you, the fans, need to go out and see, Doug and I, every week, as part of our big finish, we try to point out what the match of the week was, in our opinion, and which one, if you only had time to go back and see one wrestling match from the week, which it should be. For me, this week, it would be a program that probably doesn't get watched enough. This one came from NXT UK. I think NXT UK is a real gem, especially when NXT, the American version, has now hit its 2.0 phase. The NXT UK roster, knock on wood, hopefully it stays under Vince McMahon's radar long enough that it can continue the way that it's continuing, because it has a little bit of that old NXT flavor, in that while NXT itself has changed, NXT UK hasn't, and it's all the better for it. And it was on evidence again this past week when you had the women's match between Meiko Satomura defending the NXT UK Women's Championship against Jenny. Fantastic contest. Satomura obviously has a long career prior to NXT UK. Legend in Japan, still has the goods, still showed on this past week's episode of NXT UK that she still has the goods. Jenny is an up and comer who still has many years ahead of her, so even though it wasn't her time to wrest away the championship, you can guarantee that she's going to have a run with that title and many other titles during her really bright future. So definitely go back and watch NXT UK if you're not watching it, and especially this past week's episode, check out the NXT UK Women's title match. And with that, fans, we are to the end of the One Bro version of the Two Bros Wrestling Show. Last week we had our Halloween special. I appreciate those of you that tuned in. We had a little fun costume wise and things. Doug wasn't around for that one. I want to thank my wife Jerry, who sat in last week. We had a lot of fun. And this week I had a lot of fun doing it solo. But hopefully next week we're back to Two Bros. But if not, I will see you then, because we have more previews coming up, because it's hard to believe, but we're just on the verge of Survivor Series, which is the last pay-per-view for WWE. So this week, our main event topic, we talked about AEW's last pay-per-view of the year, WWE's last pay-per-view of the year, also upcoming. That is Survivor Series. That is our main event topic next week. We're going to preview it the same way we just did the AEW's Full Gear. We're going to go match by match and let you know the background and who we think's going to win or should win. So join us again next Sunday at 8 o'clock live here on Facebook, and then archived on YouTube for the Two Bros Wrestling Show. We appreciate your support and hope you have a wonderful week. Take care, everybody.